So we'll go ahead and get started. And thank you all for joining us today. I am Brian Seibert, Executive Director of Heirs to our Heirs to our Ocean. I want to thank you all for being with us today in our first in a series of virtual community gatherings that we'll be hosting throughout this year. During today's gathering, you're going to hear from youth leaders who are participating in Heirs to our Ocean's U.S. Youth Action Council for the UN Ocean Decade about our upcoming Hill Days, which will be in Washington, D.C., April 7th through the 11th. And during this year's Hill Days, youth leaders will be meeting directly with members of Congress to advocate for federal agencies that are critical for protecting our climate, ocean, and freshwater resources. As you'll hear during these presentations, Heirs to our Ocean provides needs-based scholarships to ensure all youth advocates, regardless of financial background, can participate in this meaningful advocacy experience. And after hearing from Heirs to our Ocean's youth leaders today, I hope that you will be inspired to make a donation to support needs-based scholarships for youth advocates to participate in Hill Days who otherwise would not be able to attend. For today, we're going to have about 20 minutes of presentation, and then I'll open the gathering up for questions and answers. And I'm going to walk through our presenters here quickly. We'll start off with Armand Alex, Program Coordinator for the U.S. Youth Action Council, Sarah Pan, Co-Chair, Policy Working Group for the U.S. Youth Action Council, Nilesh Satyanarayanan, Co-Chair, Education Working Group for the U.S. Youth Action Council, and Madison Miller, a former program analyst for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And before I turn it over to Armand, I want to share just a quick bit more about Heirs to our Ocean in this opening slide. So the U.S. Youth Action Council for the UN Ocean Decade is a program of the youth-led 501c3 organization Heirs to our Ocean, also known as H2OO. And Heirs to our Ocean is an international organization whose mission is to empower the next generation of youth leaders by connecting them in purpose, educating them on the intersection of the environmental and humanitarian crises that they're inheriting, and cultivating essential skills to create innovative solutions in real-world change. To learn more about Heirs to our Ocean, please visit our website at h2oo.org. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Armand.
Thanks, Brian. Howdy, folks. My name is Armand Alex. And before I jump into my portion, I'd love to just take a couple of seconds for us all to take 2 healthy, deep breaths in. Can y'all join me? Let's take one in. And release. And one more. And that second breath, we can thank our ocean for supplying that oxygen into our lungs and into empowering our bodies. As I mentioned before, my name is Armand Alex. I'm from the United States, located in Corpus Christi, Texas, in the lands of the Coahuila, the Cuilatecan, as well as the Lipan Apache. And this is a community alongside the Gulf of Mexico. My background is in environmental policy and science communications. My history with Heirs to our Ocean begins in 2023, when I was invited to co-chair the 4th cohort of the U.S. Youth Action Council for the United Nations Ocean Decade. And after serving in that role, my leadership was invited back, so thankfully, to then join Heirs to our Ocean on a staff level as the project coordinator and the fundraising associated for that same U.S. Youth Action Council for the United Nations Ocean Decade. And that was in the summer of last year. And since then, I have been in this role, coordinating the many moving parts of this incredible youth council. And I'm thankful that each of you have decided to join us on our very first of many, might I add, of virtual community gatherings. And thank you for taking time to be here. I'll be sharing with you all an overview of the United Nations Ocean Decade briefly, and a history of the U.S. Youth Action Council for the UN Ocean Decade. Now on this slide, we have some information about the UN Ocean Decade. The United Nations Ocean Decade, officially known as the Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, it spans from the year 2021 to the year 2030. And this global initiative seeks to generate the scientific knowledge and foster the international collaboration required to reverse the decline in ocean health and ensure that our ocean is sustainable for future generations. Heirs to Our Ocean, or H2OO for short, contributes as a decade implementation partner, also known as a DIP, the top of your screen there. We do this by engaging young people in science-based advocacy, educational programming, and direct action that aligns with the decade's goals. And our involvement underscores the critical need for inclusive platforms that not only recognize the value of youth voices, but actively integrate them into decision-making processes at all levels. Investing in our programs here at H2OO supports a vital pipeline that nurtures young, informed advocates who are not just preparing to inherit responsibility of our ocean, but are already taking up that mantle. And your support helps us ensure that the ocean that sustains us today will be vibrant and healthy tomorrow. In turning to the U.S. Youth Action Council for the UN Ocean Decade, or the USYAC for the UNOD, our mission is to engage young people ages 15 to 25 in driving meaningful actions and solutions to ocean climate challenges. And since its inception, we have actively involved youth in pivotal projects, such as contributing to the only white paper from Challenge 10 that includes youth perspectives, developing a toolkit by Heirs to Our Ocean to support the formation of other youth action councils globally and UN member states through their UN steering committees, fostering a networked movement of youth across the world, and producing a youth perspectives toolkit on the decade's challenges by our Education Working Group Committee. These initiatives, I would say, exemplify our commitment to amplifying and supporting those youth voices and building a youth-led movement. Our mission at the U.S. Youth Action Council for the UN Ocean Decade is to engage a diverse group of youth of the U.S. to further the UN Ocean Decade goals in a way that best serves the generation of the youth in each of their communities. This involves a steadfast commitment to encouraging and supporting action, supporting agency, supporting inclusion, and skill building among youth in our generation. We achieve this not just through advocacy, but by actual policy influence, actual research, and actual community engagement. Each initiative and project that we undertake is geared towards expanding the capabilities and commitment of young people to meet growing ocean challenges more effectively. And lastly, to accomplish this mission, as I'd mentioned prior, the U.S. Youth Action Council operates through various committees, more specifically, each with a specific focus area, including policy, movement, and education. These working group committees allow members to specialize and develop skills that are relevant to their interests, while also contributing effectively to the UN Ocean Decade goals. And the reason why that we're here today, of course, is to learn more about the 2025 Capitol Hill Days, our policy working group committees work, and the historic nature of them planning, developing, leading, and also following up around all things Hill Days. And to demonstrate the impacts and results of former Capitol Hill Day events, I'd like to turn it over to some of our current and former YAC members who have engaged directly with this important advocacy movement, but also I had the pleasure of serving alongside as well. And so to get us started, I'll pass it over to Nilesh.
Thank you so much, Arman. Hello, everyone. My name is Nilesh Satyanarayanan. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm currently a co-chair of the Education Working Group Committee. I was also a member of the Education Working Group Committee in the 3rd and 4th cohort, and I'm a senior in high school in Washington State in the United States. The U.S. Capitol Hill Days is an annual policy advocacy opportunity spearheaded by the U.S. Youth Action Council for the UN Ocean Decade, where a cohort of passionate youth coordinate meetings with lawmakers to speak virtually and in person, typically in Washington, D.C., to advocate for policy initiatives that align with our council's mission of promoting a sustainable one water system. This year's U.S. Capitol Hill Days will be the first of its kind, speaking to lawmakers about federal agencies that are critical stakeholders in the climate and ocean conversation and support the health, safety, and well-being of all of us. As part of this experience, we engage in rigorous policy research and gain valuable experience around communicating and storytelling the imperative for climate action. I had the honor of attending the U.S. Capitol Hill Days 2 years ago as a 10th grader. It was my first significant experience in policy advocacy, and I didn't really know what to expect. However, attending the U.S. Capitol Hill Days really highlighted the power of my personal voice and the youth perspective in driving change in action. I was able to see the firsthand impacts of my advocacy with the reintroduction of the Sustainable Agriculture Research Act, the bill that I advocated for in the next congressional session. One of the most unique and enriching aspects of the US Capitol Hill Days is that we bring individuals from both sides of the political aisle as part of the federal policy conversation around ocean and climate related issues. Yes, US Capitol Hill Days involves tough and sometimes uncomfortable conversations with people who might not seem eye to eye with you. However, being able to reach common ground and walk out of a conversation feeling that I had an influence is something so empowering and motivating. It's motivated me to be a leader in youth advocacy spaces, such as the USYAC, but to also speak out about these issues in my local community. Additionally, the sense of community you build with the cohort of peers who embark on this experience with you gives hope for the future, while providing the incredible opportunity to meet new people and make long-lasting friendships. While my experience involved policy advocacy in the form of advocating for specific eco-justice bills, such as the Sustainable Agriculture Research Act I mentioned, our political climate has changed significantly as a consequence of the 2024 election cycle. Now I'll pass it off to Sarah to speak about how the USYAC has shifted its plans for the US Capitol Hill Days to create the most impact it can have this year.
Thank you so much, Neelish. Hello, my name is Sarah Pan. I use she, her pronouns, and I am one of the co-chairs of the Policy Working Group Committee, as well as an alumna of the fourth cohort. I'm a 17-year-old from Maryland who's passionate about local organizing and social justice, and understanding how climate change directly impacts my community made me want to get involved with organizations like Heirs. Now, due to the red trifecta in DC, in which the Republicans controlled the House, Senate, presidency, and the courts, we figured that it would be very, very difficult to pass eco-justice bills. And what we have seen so far in the Trump administration has confirmed this. So instead, we pivoted towards focusing on appropriations this US Capitol Hill Day, and this is crucial given that the current administration has been targeting key federal programs. Essentially, the appropriations process is where Congress decides how much money is allotted towards each agency and subsequently the programs they can fund. Since the Trump administration is making cuts to many key agencies and federal programs such as the Department of Education, USAID, the EPA, we believe that focusing on appropriations rather than traditional bill advocacy would be the most impactful, as we wanted to act as a line of defense to these programs. In terms of the U.S. Capitol Hill Days this year, the process of scheduling the meetings will look around the same, except we'll be advocating for funding towards key environmental agencies rather than bills. So right now, the 4 agencies we want to prioritize the most are the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, National Aeronautics Science Administration, Department of Education, and the Environmental Protection Agency due to their important role in providing jobs, protecting our climate, and working towards eco-justice. Now I'll be summarizing the importance of each of the agencies that we've chosen. From NOAA, which plays a key role in sending natural disaster alerts and managing them to ensure our health and safety. NASA, which supports climate change research and solutions to the climate crisis to ensure a livable future for all. The Department of Education, which builds the next generation of environmental leaders and provides equitable opportunities in education so that children are mobilized and pumped to build a more just world. And finally, the Environmental Protection Agency, which enforces environmental regulations to ensure a healthier, more sustainable future for our communities and future generations. Now I'll be transitioning into some of the ways these agencies affect Maryland. So the EPA produces these annual water quality reports for Maryland, and many of these reports contain information about public schools in my county to ensure that our drinking water isn't polluted with contaminants like PFAS and lead and etc. With the NOAA and National Weather Service, we get adequate alerts of potential storms to ensure that we're all safe and prepared for these disasters. For example, last month I got a severe weather alert a few hours before my power was cut, and so having that notice was really useful to ensure that we had enough flashlights or any resources we needed to prepare for this disaster. We also have some Title I schools in my county, as well as a portion of school children who rely on free and reduced lunch. And this is really crucial to ensure that all students, no matter their socioeconomic background, can have access to good quality education and nutrition. And all of these fall under the Department of Education. Now I'll be transitioning into the need for need-based scholarships. As you may know, Heirs to Our Ocean centers itself on eco-justice, and one of the ways we have achieved this is by making sure people from underrepresented groups are centered and given a seat at the decision-making table. A great example of how Hill Days can change the trajectory of a youth's life for the better is Isaiah. Last year, Isaiah was a member of the policy working group alongside me, and he received a need-based scholarship to attend Hill Days last year. Per his testimony, quote, Hill Days provides youth with a hands-on experience of how their government works and demonstrates that their advocacy can make a difference. Thanks to the support of community members who believed in Heirs' mission, my experience at the 2024 Hill Days opened the door for me to now work on Capitol Hill. The experience gave me the opportunity to connect with youth who share my belief that it takes a village, a group, or even a youth council to change the world. I am grateful for the opportunity Heirs provided me, and I hope other community members will help more youth receive the same opportunity. Therefore, it is imperative we continue to empower youth leaders in a policy space that is often inaccessible to many, and give other youth like Isaiah the opportunity to share their voice. We want to make sure that everyone on the Youth Action Council has the opportunity to learn how to speak to their legislators, to seek a healthier, cleaner, more just world via appropriations this Hill Day. We are committed to ensuring that cost is never a barrier for these young leaders to access high-level opportunities that elevate their passions and expand their impact. By investing in their professional development, we empower them to transition directly into policy work and become the empathetic, informed leaders that our world urgently needs. Now I'll pass it back to Brian to introduce Madison Miller, an alumni for the U.S. Youth Action Council for the UN Ocean Decade.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Madison Miller, until recently being forced out by the Trump administration, served as a program analyst for NOAA's Research International Activities Office, where she was the lead for the UN Ocean Decade. And as Sarah mentioned, Madison is a U.S. Youth Action Council alum who started working for NOAA after serving on the first cohort of the U.S. Youth Action Council. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Madison, and let you take it from here.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the current cohort for inviting me to speak today. And Sarah, I think your presentation flows really nicely into mine. Great descriptions on how the data that these agencies collect are beneficial to your local community in Maryland. I'm also based in Maryland, the Washington, D.C. area, where I've been for about 3 years now. I apologize if you guys can hear the leaf blower. They decided to do that right outside my window as it was my turn to talk. So apologize if you can hear that. I'm just going to start with a quick introduction of who I am and my background, and then kind of talk about why NOAA is important and why I'm really excited that you guys are going to be advocating for us on the Hill. Can you go to the other slide first, Emily? It's just a bunch of pictures of me and my wonderful colleagues that I've gotten the chance to work with at NOAA. So my background is in coral reef and invasive seagrass ecology. That's my research background. I was doing that in my thesis work, but I somehow got involved in this thing called, back in the day, it was called the U.S. Youth Advisory Council, not Action Council, of the UN Ocean Decade, just to show you how much it's grown. And when I took that on, it really kind of jump-started my interest in the policy side of science. You don't get a lot of that in school. When you're doing research for the sake of research, and nobody ever really talks about what your research, who it benefits, why you do it, the bigger impacts of it. So I got really into policy during my first Hill days, which were virtual because it was COVID, but they were still impactful nonetheless. And after that, I actually became a Canals Fellow in NOAA, or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Coral Reef Conservation Program. And then after that, I took a job in NOAA Research's International Activities Office, first as a contractor. So in the US, we contract a lot of people to the government. But I recently, in August of 2024, was promoted to a federal employee. But unfortunately, my time was cut short February 27th, 2025, when myself and 800 of my colleagues were wrongfully fired from NOAA for no just cause. So the reason NOAA is so important, and the reason this attack on NOAA and other federal agencies is absurd. NOAA was established and written into federal law in 1970 by President Nixon. So it doesn't just exist. We exist for a reason, because a president back in the day said, we need this science. We need the science to make our country safer. So NOAA exists, and our mission is to do science, provide services to the American people, and steward our oceans and land. To do this, we need to understand and predict changes in climate, weather, ocean, and coast. We want to share this information with others. All of our data is publicly accessible, not just to Americans, but to the rest of the world. And we want to conserve and manage our coastal and marine ecosystems and resources, because what people may not realize is how important those resources are to their daily lives. So to do this, NOAA has 5 line offices. We've got the Weather Service, which is everybody's favorite. We've got the research arm of NOAA, which is where I've worked, the National Ocean Service, Fisheries, and then our one that I think goes under the radar a lot, where our hurricane hunter sits and the people who run our ships is our Marine and Aviation Services. And we provide weather forecasting data that keeps people safe from hurricanes, floods, wildfires. We preserve and restore critical ecosystems and infrastructure. We manage our fisheries so that people have food on their tables, and so much more. I think a big part of the work I did was recognizing that NOAA doesn't only help keep Americans safe, but our data is used worldwide on an international scale. For example, practically every major weather service in the world, including the European Union's European Commission's Weather Forecasting Office, incorporates NOAA's open access data into improving their weather forecasting systems. So it's not just an us problem. The decline of our federal agencies will impact the people of the world on a broader scale. You can go to the next slide now. Thanks. Oh, wait, I actually don't see the slides anymore. It doesn't really matter. They're just pictures.
I'll go back.
All good. I'm going to keep talking, though, because I know I don't have a ton of time. Anyway, so losing critical NOAA staff will do the complete opposite of what America First claims to want, which is to have a safe, prosperous, and strong nation. Cutting NOAA staff and our budget will put lives at risk, specifically those that are in low-income minority communities. It's not just an attack on the average American. Actually, it is an attack on the average American, not the 1%. Project 2025 has specifically called out NOAA. We're a bit of a celebrity there. Specifically, the Weather Service and the research offices. They aim to privatize the Weather Service, which would cost Americans more money to get access to weather, which again is an attack on low-income minority communities, and it cuts critical climate change research programs because they seem to think that we are the ones making climate change decisions, when in fact, everything that NOAA does just supports facts and science. We don't make decisions, we take the facts to the decision makers. We shouldn't be cutting NOAA budget. In fact, we should be increasing it. Recent studies show that on average, NOAA actually saves the American taxpayer more money than we are appropriated through Congress. I can back those up with facts and evidence too. So my wish for you guys taking this on the Hill, which me and my colleagues are very grateful that we have advocates like you guys standing up for what's right and protecting what we think is critical to our nation, is to use your time on the Hill not only to advocate for those of us that have been wrongfully terminated, but to emphasize the importance NOAA and the other agencies have, the importance of science, that science saves lives, the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in STEM overall, and the detrimental consequences of deconstructing and defunding institutions like NOAA. Aim to not only talk to your Democratic congresspeople, they know, they're out there at the rallies speaking, but the red states, they need to hear that their constituents aren't okay with these actions. And also make sure you bring your facts and your evidence. They like to fact check. It's a thing to do now. And so just having that with you so you can say, these are the facts. This is what your constituents think. Make the right choices. And then use stories of those who have been directly impacted. Maybe that's you. Maybe in your community, you've seen firsthand what a hurricane can do. Using those stories is really impactful. I personally think that storytelling is how you change minds. It's connecting. And the fact that you guys get to go in person and connect and make that human connection with these people, I think is really going to be super beneficial. And I'm really, really again thankful for the Youth Action Council for doing this. And I'm here to support you in any way that you guys need moving forward. So thank you guys again for letting me talk your ear off. And I will pass it back to Brian, I think.
Yep. Thank you, Madison. Really appreciate you sharing your lived experience. Thank you so much. And before I open up the gathering to questions, answers, conversation, just wanted to note how Madison's remarks really emphasize the urgency of the times that we're in, and how the impact will be felt if agencies like NOAA are dismantled, privatized, and what that will mean for the American public and what that will mean for the world. And this is also, again, why your financial support for needs-based scholarships to youth to participate in Hill Days is really so critical. And again, just want to ask that you please consider making a contribution to support youth who are striving to make their voices heard and make a difference through Heirs to Our Ocean's Hill Days. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions and answers. Feel free to ask your question just by speaking up. You can use the raise your hand feature in Zoom, or you can also place your question in chat. And we'd love to have your questions and thoughts. So we'll open it up at this point.
I see Brad has his hand up. Brad, feel free.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I really appreciate the presentations. Thank you all so much. Earlier, mentioning that kind of pivot around Hill Day, not necessarily going after bills, but talking about funding these important programs. And Madison, thank you for sharing your story. It's tragic, and I'm sorry that this has happened to you. You certainly deserve better. Do we have a strategy on how to approach that on the Hill when we go? I know we've got many years of practice lobbying for bills, but what does it look like to go? And is it the government we need to talk to, or are there law firms we could be lobbying? I know there's been a lot of legal action taken against this administration to get people reinstated. I'm just curious if y'all have if you have thoughts on that strategy.
Right. So, in terms, I can definitely answer some of the discussions we've been having in the policy working group on how to approach meetings on the Hill. So, in terms of meeting with the government specifically, we decided it would probably be most accessible to meet with Congress people, especially if we have constituents in their district, just to show how important these programs are for the district. And since Trump has like new appointees for NOAA and EPA, etc., it might be difficult for us to get a meeting with them to convince them of anything. But in terms of like whenever we approach Republican offices, we generally want to emphasize the broader impacts of climate change that will directly impact them. Like, for example, rather than using the words climate change, we might highlight how hurricanes may be affecting their state, food shortages, etc. And I think leveraging on those points would be, and just making sure that our economic impacts are highlighted will be a key point that will be moving on. And I don't think the policy working group committee has had any discussions in regards to law firms, but I think that's definitely a good place to look into, given that many courts are like fighting back Trump's decisions, especially agency layoffs.
If I might just follow up on that, because you mentioned the economic impacts of some of these things, and I think the current administration talks a lot about money being their primary focus, and just we can all call into question how well they're doing in that regard. But in my experience with Heirs to Our Ocean, I've also learned over the years the economic importance of healthy environments. Is that something also that you mentioned focusing on that? But do we have kind of a corpus of information we plan to take with us and present?
Yeah, so in all of our Hill Day handouts, our policy working group committee did research on the specific like amount that like the ocean economy contributes per state and specific statistics we can bring into the meeting. And so I believe this information will be present on the handouts that we give to the lawmakers. Also, Dakota, I saw your question in the chat, and anyone from Heirs, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe on the Heirs donor page, you can just like write a note that it says like Hill Days or something like that. So it's like directly donated towards that.
That is correct. Thank you, Sarah. Yes, you can write a memo that says you want those funds to go to a scholarship for Hill Days.
If you don't mind, Sarah, I'd also love to contribute here as well. I think the transition we went from starting in the place of bill advocacy to where we are now in terms of we're going to be focusing on defending critical federal agency funding. wasn't something that we took lightly. There was a lot of time that was put into thinking about the strategy. Was it relevant? How do we meet this moment? We were doing this in the months of when the election happened in last November through December and early January. So it's about 3 months that we took to really sit down and meet with experts in policy advocacy spaces, in the spaces of the previous administration, and folks who have been doing this for quite some time. And what we realized is that regardless of whether you're Republican or Democrat, these essential services impact, as Madison mentioned, not just one or the other, but everyone, especially in the US. And we also know that there's ties to folks across the world, specifically the EU space and their weather services, as Madison mentioned. The other thing that I thought would be incredibly helpful is, as Sarah mentioned before, we are going into these meetings with Republicans and Democrats with the facts. We know that, say, for instance, in the state of Florida, for example, in regard to the Environmental Protection Agency, over 150,000 clean energy jobs are provided there. In the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration for Florida, it impacts 24,000 businesses. They accumulate wages of over $16.5 billion annually. In the space of NASA for Florida alone, we know that it supports over 35,000 jobs, and it has produced state tax revenue of $62.1 million. And so these are real facts that we think both Democrats and Republicans are going to be able to respond to. Now, are they going to be able to maybe push back on their commander-in-chief at the White House? Who knows? But what we can agree on is that they are more likely to listen to their constituents when they are primed and prepped with the actual facts. They cannot deny these economic impacts that they are seeing in their communities. And they are certainly, as history has shown, to respond to these economic numbers. But it's not just about those numbers. And when we go into meetings with Democrats, we're also primed, as Madison had requested, with those real stories. Family loss from hurricanes, coastal erosion plans and the loss of biodiversity. Those stories also have impacts. And so whether it is the economic factors or the testimonies from real stories of the US Youth Action Council members, and might I add, a part of our strategy this year is bringing in external youth from the US Youth Action Council. We also have a robust strategy to incorporate young people that are outside of the US Youth Action Council so that we can provide even more real testimonies into those congressional meetings. And so, Brad, I'm so appreciative that you asked this question around strategy because it took a lot of intentional time. And I'm so excited that Hill Days has not necessarily been something new for Heirs to Our Ocean. We've been doing it since 2021. The only difference this year is we're focusing on funding, and we're taking all those wonderful lessons and the skills that we've acquired over the past couple of years and really investing in meeting this moment for the US, but this moment for what its impact is for the rest of the world. Thanks for asking that question, Brad.
All right. Any other questions or thoughts that anyone would like to share? I see.
I have a question, Brian. So, unless
Yes.
Brad, did you have another one?
I do, but go ahead. I'm eating up all the air
Mine
here.
is simple. Mine's simple. Sarah, could you share where external youth are able to sign up? I know a couple of Washington, D.C. youth that might be interested in engaging, so I'd like to share it with them.
I just put the link in the chat for
Okay,
you.
perfect.
Yeah, and it would be great if they could sign up ASAP since we have a training on Friday to go over the process of prepping for Hill Days. So, but if they can't sign up in time, we'll definitely send that link to them so they know what to do and they're onboarded into a team.
Amazing. And is the age cutoff is 23? 25, 23?
25.
25. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and voice my next kind of maybe question slash suggestion, although I don't have any idea of how you might execute this, but I think you all are more creative and have more insight. It does occur to me that there are thousands of people who have recently lost their jobs who you're advocating for, who might be interested in coming and standing with you. Have you guys considered trying to find ways to reach out to those communities, especially the folks who are government workers in DC who might be available and have the time to come and rally with you. Also, it seems like the information you're pulling together on these handouts could be really useful in some of the town hall activities that I've been seeing prop up virally. So I'm wondering if, going out and having these handouts that are H2OO branded with the contact information might be a good way to kind of simultaneously provide more data for the constituents and then raise awareness for your org.
Really quickly, and then welcoming other folks from within the airspace to contribute. One of the things that I appreciate and why I continue to choose to offer my time and energy and enjoy working in the space of Heirs to Our Ocean is our ability to collaborate meaningfully, and not just from a top-down approach, but really recognizing who we have shoulder to shoulder and elbow to elbow. So Brad, as it relates to that particular suggestion, I don't know if we have essentially put together that plan, but we have Sarah Pan, of course, as you know, is our current co-chair for the Policy Working Group Committee. And Sarah's here. And I think that these are opportunities for us to really expand. I think the whole point of us today having a virtual community gathering is to hear directly how we can support each other and how we can support youth in my generation who are taking it straight to folks in the National Mall, in the White House, in Capitol Hill. And so, Sarah, I recognize that this may be a real opportunity that Brad has mentioned to include more people in this process. And if it isn't this particular Hill Days, I know that we do this each year. The Policy Working Group Committee, I'm sure, has demonstrated itself to be quite dynamic. So thanks, Brad, for offering that. And I'll open it up to anyone else from the Heirs team to reflect on that.
May I share a thought and a query on that, Armand? Really wondering also, I know that you all aim as you need to, especially now more than ever, for bipartisanship in terms of the facts that you're bringing. And just a quick thought is I wonder if strategically bringing those folks who have been cut from these to be there live, for instance, maybe during a virtual social live moment would affect that bipartisanship aim that you're so strategically trying to dance around and be thoughtful around. Just something that came to mind as that was being processed.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, April. Certainly a very mindful strategy that we've seen from previous cohorts, including that of under the direction of Sarah and Jake Snyder, our other co-chair for the Policy Working Group Committee, is that that preference to doing bipartisanship and making sure that it's very balanced. I think it is something that Youth Action Council members should be exposed to in terms of hearing from how these federal staff members were immediately impacted by some of these choices. And if not to include directly their stories in those meetings, but to offer motivation that what they are doing in terms of their advocacy there on Capitol Hill matters. Not just, as I've mentioned before, the economic benefits state to state, but the real people that are impacted as they dedicate their life's work to those positions, to offering us an ability to understand our weather systems, to be more educated in the spaces of climate. So I think that's actually something really valuable that you've offered, April. Thanks for sharing that as well.
Also, to Brad's point, I know that in person Airs does a press conference. I'm not sure if that's happening this year, but I think it would definitely be useful to highlight the importance and impact and the urgency of our work since many people have been laid off for no reason at all, being really good employees. And I think just having those people just share their experiences to understand that this is a problem that's not just affecting like one part of the political spectrum, but like a lot of the American people can be definitely useful.
I want to add to that because I know we don't have a Yak Comms team member on this, but I do know they are not doing a official press conference this time. Instead, they're going to be doing a series of live reels, things like that on our social media. So if you do not yet follow us on social media, I'll share that in the chat. And if you can share those communications going out. There's going to be a lot of them on April 7th through the 11th. That would really help us get the word out and garner more support for this.
Yeah, I'm also thinking about to something that had been mentioned prior is Sarah, we're creating and putting together a lot of research and metrics on the impacts of these agencies in the space of the EPA, NOAA, NASA, and the Department of Education. I think maybe it would be even most helpful to share that publicly as we prepare for Hill Days as well. And so maybe there's some communications around those particular metrics, then also maybe highlighting those stories on our socials. I think it's a wonderful idea. Again, I'm super excited that we are doing this kind of virtual community gathering because this input is incredibly helpful for us to amplify the work that we're doing.
I'm gonna jump in because Ellie Curlow has her hand raised for a question.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. It's great to see you. And following up on Brad's suggestion about law firms, another group to consider reaching out to. They have a lot of influence and they can get people to turn out are the federal employees unions. So they are rallying behind the federal workers. They are leading lawsuits. They show up with signs. They could come if you're going to do any kind of when they had the NOAA rallies, Madison can attest to that. They're really leading the charge, and may even have a younger cohort. But they would be very. I can't think of a contact name off the top of my head, but I know they're probably not difficult to find. Would be receptive, and could be very helpful if you wanted to do any kind of like a West Lawn rally or some type of show up at one of the senators or congresspeople's, buildings. So just wanted to put that out there. The Federal Employees Union. So NOAA employees are part of a union, EPA employees are part of the union, and other agencies.
All right, thank you for that. Any other questions or comments? We're closing in on the hour now, so definitely want to respect everyone's time, but also see if there are any other questions before we wrap up here.
I just wanted to respond quickly to a question in the chat from Chloe, who said a few youth are on the call from outside the US, which is amazing. Welcome, y'all, from international spaces. You all are more than welcome to participate virtually in the Hill Days. We will say, though, the meetings, because they have to take place during the business hours of the US on the East Coast, they will be from between 9 and 5 p.m. Eastern time. So we'll try our best once you sign up to put you on a team where you can attend meetings at a reasonable hour for you.
Can I add on to that, Emily? I know you guys didn't have USAID listed as one of the agencies, but if you are tying in international voices, it's such a loss. What's happening to the forced work stop for the U.S. Agency of International Development. That was how we kind of gave back to the world, I think. And so it's a little disheartening that we are losing so many advancements, but also we are hurting other people without that work. And so just something to consider. I don't want to overburden you guys with more agencies, but just a thought if that opportunity comes up to advocate for that group.
And Ellie, I was really appreciating everything that you shared. Do you have names or contact of folks? I'm imagining that this is probably in your back pocket. Maybe you can send an email of anything
It's not in
additionally.
my back pocket, but I think I can put a few calls out or see who might be able to come up with some information.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you, Ellie.
You're welcome.
All right. There is one other question in the chat. I see it said, would people be arrested for rallying in front of the Senate building, given that they will be at the Hill where security is tight? I think that's one of those situations where probably if there is a rally, there are certain protocol that have to be followed and looked into on the Capitol grounds. And I don't know all of that, but definitely that needs to be thought of before having a rally on the Capitol grounds. But looks like Armand, you have your hand up, so maybe you have a more definitive answer.
Thanks, Brian. I think what I'd like to offer here, and then of course, keeping an eye on the time, so I'll make it brief. Heirs to our Ocean has a experienced and a committed, let's just be real. I mean, we are incredibly committed to keeping in mind the hearts, minds, and souls of the youth that we work with. And so we are very particular in making sure that when we are together in spaces that are far from people's homes, that we are keeping people safe. And so we make sure that before we step into any space, before we step into any building, take a trip anywhere, we think through all of these moving pieces in a very strategic way. And I think whether it is a rally or whether it is a press conference, we make sure to put all of those pieces and consider all things. And I think certainly we are living in unprecedented times with this administration. And so we want to make sure that the safety of the youth that we are traveling with in DC, that's at the forefront of our mind. And so we are committed to attending and traveling to DC to meet with lawmakers, to discuss the points that we had offered today in terms of defending the funding for the EPA, for NASA, NOAA, and the Department of Education. And we'll do our best to do that. And if there are other points where we are able to support that are intersectional with other pieces of, whether it's the Federal Employees Union, as an example, we know that the work that we're doing as a U.S. Youth Action Council on the Hill also influences those other spaces. And if there is that mutual benefit, that mutual support, and the advocacy of our youth, we'll continue to offer that and support the strategic decisions of our youth as well. So I just wanted to offer that as it relates to that question in terms of, we don't know. Unprecedented times. We've seen what this administration is willing to do with protesters. But that's not necessarily why we are going to DC. We are committed to defending the funding of NOAA, EPA, NASA, and the Department of Education. And if we're able to, Madison, to your point, bringing in those other spaces as well. One thing that we have specifically mentioned with our teams in person is everyone in that team needs to be on the same page about what they're going to say in that meeting so that there's mutual understanding and everyone is comfortable in those spaces. So there's a lot of time, energy, and thoughtful mindfulness in preparations for those meetings. But thanks for that question. And thank you, Brian, for opening it up for us too. I'll pass it back over to you for our closing.
All right. I want to thank you all for joining us today and being part of this community gathering, this conversation. We really appreciate your attention. We really appreciate your support and participation. I just dropped into the link here on chat, dropped a link into the chat for how to donate to Heirs to Our Ocean. And as we mentioned earlier, you're able to make sure that if you would like to have that donation directed towards Hill Days and directed for youth participation in Hill Days. So I want to, again, thank you all. And you can see on the slide here, become part of our movement to empower the next generation of empathetic leaders. I just mentioned donating for need-based scholarships for U.S. Capitol Hill Days. If you are a youth, you can sign up to participate virtually in the U.S. Capitol Hill Days. I think that link is being dropped into the chat now. And please share these opportunities with your network to help us build our movement and further our reach. I want to thank you all again. You'll be getting a follow-up email with the recording of today's community gathering, and I would ask that if you can, please share that recording with anyone in your network who would be interested in supporting youth who are working to have their voices heard for a more just and sustainable future. So with that, I should also mention our next community gathering is going to be in May, so keep your eyes out for that announcement. We'd love to have you back and join us for our May conversation. More details on that to come. But I want to wish you all a wonderful day, and I want to thank you so much for spending your time with us this afternoon, this morning, wherever you may be. Take care, and thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Thank
Bye,
you so
everyone.
much for listening.